When we look at this Green Bay Packers offense, they rank pretty high in almost every major statistical category. They're currently eighth in points per game, fifth in yards per game, fifth in yards per play, and sixth in EPA per play. So, Eric, what did you see from this Packers offense on film?
LaFleur, he comes out of that Shanahan tree. So they love to set up play action off of the run game. They have a diverse amount of run concepts, a lot of window dressing. Let's get the eyes of the linebackers and the edge players moving over here, and then we're going this way. Play action passes that look identical until they don't hand it off of that, and they've been highly effective. They distribute the ball around probably as much as any team in the NFL. So it's really interesting to see. Dontavian Wicks was their target leader. Jaden Reed had the most yards. Tucker Kraft had the most touchdowns, and Romeo Dobbs had the most first downs. And then Watson, who's out, was their big deep threat. He had the highest yards per catch. So they all have their role, but it also makes it harder to like set up designer coverages to take one like star receiver out of the game. They mix it up. That's kind of how I would define the core of their offense. They do have one of the highest rates of deep passes in the NFL. A lot of their concepts have a bunch of guys running downfield, but it does seem to build off of the run game first, and I think LaFleur has done a good job sticking to that, whether they're down um, or whether they're facing a good run defense to really make you honor that.
Yeah, a lot of the same stuff that you mentioned already. They have the second highest run rate in the NFL. The first is the Eagles. When you look at the Packers running backs, they are had the sixth most rushing yards in the NFL and ninth in yards per carry at 4.5. They also have the third most wide receiver carries in the NFL as well. They utilize a plethora of jet sweeps and reverses. I think everyone remembers Jaden Reed had the big touchdown run against the Eagles in week one, and it's an explosive rushing attack. They have the fourth highest explosive run rate. They have an extremely diverse run game that really tests your eye discipline and your keys, and the run fits are of the utmost importance this week. They have a run package that's essentially like a shotgun wing T or a single wing offense. It's pretty interesting and creative to watch. This play against the Seahawks explains what I'm talking about. The Packers have two backs in the backfield and are using Jaden Reed like a wing player. At the snap, the Packers make this look like a typical counter run play. The guard pulls to the defense's right with the center back blocking on the defensive tackle aligned over the pulling guard. The fullback, in this case Packers running back Chris Brooks, starts out like he's going to be pulling around with the guard, but he reverses course and lead blocks to the edge. The center, who appeared to be back blocking, is pulling around the edge with the running back as well. At the same time, Jaden Reed is looping around the edge on a reverse. This play really tests the keys of the defense. Every team has their rules for which players they want the linebackers to key. Some teams key the guard, some teams key the center and guard, while some teams key the near back. All of these keys are false reads for the linebackers, and we see all that misdirection spring the wingback for a big gain. Now, looking at their pass game, you mentioned it, they really do spread the ball out to a bunch of different players, so it's kind of hard to key in on which receivers to take away. But this passing attack is 12th in yards per game, and you got to remember they have the second highest run rate in the NFL. So when we look at a yards per attempt metric, they are fourth highest in the NFL. When we look at their pass game, a lot of it comes off of RPOs or play action. They have the ninth highest percentage of passes that are either from RPO or play action in the NFL, but it does look like they had a little bit of a decline in their play action rate as the season went on. It looked like there was some more drop back passing attack. They really target the middle of the field at a high rate. 47.6% of their passes come between the numbers. That's compared to 39.6% for Jalen Hurts this year. Now, the big thing that we really need to pay attention to is Christian Watson being out. He only had 53 targets this season, but he's had kind of like that Deshaun Jackson effect on the Eagles, where his speed to take the top off the defense, open up things for the rest of the offense. When you look at the Packers averages with and without Watson on the field, they go from 8.9 yards per attempt with Watson on the field to 7.0 yards per attempt. Their first and explosive plays per route with Watson on the field, that drops to 13 with Watson off the field. The biggest issue is in man coverage. When we look at Christian Watson, he's fourth in yards per route run against man coverage this season. No other Packers wide receiver is in the top 50. And Jordan Love averages 7.3 yards per attempt against man with Watson on the field, 3.6 yards per attempt win off. So the Eagles would be pretty smart to match up in man-to-man coverage against this Packers team whenever possible. One last thing that I do want to mention, we talked about it in our preview episode the first time that we played the Packers, but you really want to get the Packers out of third and short situations, because when they have to pass on third down and when they can't use all that misdirection, play action, RPO, that stuff that they do to confuse the defenders, particularly the second and third level defenders, right? They're what they do on third down really isn't that good. If we look at the 40 qualifying quarterbacks with 50 pass attempts on third down, Jordan Love was 32nd in yards per attempt and 36th in completion percentage. So we really want to try and stay out of third down. But that's pretty much what I have for an overview of the schematics of the Packers offense. Was there anything else you wanted to add on there?
Yeah, you mentioned that the Eagles could lean on some man coverage with Watson out. And even throughout the season, the Packers were 14th most effective against man coverage, but they were fourth best in the NFL against zone. One other thing I would mention is for the run game, they've been leaning on this pony personnel, especially after week 10, 80 something percent when they're in the two running back sets. And people don't really realize this. Their backup running back, Emmanuel Wilson, he's a good running back and he has like 500 yards on the season.
Now, switching over to the defensive side of the ball, this Packers defense is really good in its own right as well. When we look at their metrics for the 2024 season, they're sixth in points per game allowed, fifth in yards per game allowed, fifth in yards per play allowed, and fourth in EPA per play allowed. Now, the interesting part is they've dealt with injuries to all parts of their defense this season. Jair Alexander has missed 10 games and he's now out for the season. Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper at linebacker have both missed multiple games throughout the season. And then their safeties, Evan Williams and Javon Bullard, have both missed multiple games as well. They've had a constant rotation in the secondary, and they have still been a top 5 defense by many metrics. So, Eric, what did you see from this Packers defense on film?
It's something we talked about off the podcast. They're playing a lot of cover two, almost 1/5 of their snaps. Now, if you juxtapose that with the Eagles, they're running 1% of the snaps cover two, almost completely eschewing the coverage entirely. So that's a big difference. If people recall, the Steelers started to play some cover two in the third quarter. Hurts was dealing in the first half, getting the ball out ultra fast. They were playing a lot of single high. They started to play a lot more cover two in the second half, and you could see he started to hold it, kind of what we had been used to throughout the season. So it will be interesting to see what kind of cover two beaters they come up with.
The Eagles' favorite way to generate explosives against cover two has been to throw off the drop of the hole player. The hole player is the player in cover two that is responsible for closing off the middle hole created by not having a middle of the field safety. Typically, it is a linebacker, but teams will definitely change up who is closing off the middle hole to give the quarterback a different read. However, the hole player usually opens up to the field side or the side with more receiving threats. Because of that, the Eagles like to use boundary digs to attack this vacated area. Here we see the Eagles send Devontae Smith up the middle of the field on a clear out route. The linebacker attaches to it, and A.J. Brown comes open for a chunk gain. On this next play, we see the same principles, with the linebacker opening to the field, but the Eagles run a bow concept. They have the number 2 receiver, this time Dallas Goedert, run a hitch route to get the hook defender to nail down and create an easy window for A.J. Brown on the dig route again. This last play isn't a boundary dig, but the Eagles are using the same principle of throwing off the drop of the hole player. The Eagles are running 4 verts, and Jalen Hurts hits Grant Calcaterra for an easy gain up the seam. Stay tuned till later in the video as we break down some more plays to attack the Packers coverage.
The Packers defense blitzed like the second lowest rate in the NFL against like true pass sets or dropbacks, and they'll generally play man coverage behind the blitz when they do. So that it's nice because it's not like the Eagles have to put in some robust pressure package. I really doubt the Packers are going to start flooding them with a bunch of blitzes. One other thing I'll mention is they have too many players fill outside. I see it time and time again. I've had a thread on Twitter that kind of showed some of these plays. They'll leave cutback lanes. Their back 7 trigger downhill extremely aggressively. They're coming up as fast as they possibly can sprint. In my opinion, if you get Jurgens, Dickerson, Mailata on the move outside, they can seek and destroy some of these secondary players and potentially spring a long run. So it's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on. One thing I would be weary of is Eagles fans know Hurts at times will have a tendency to just kind of drift and then work towards the sidelines and then toss the ball out of bounds. That is a death sentence against the Packers. They've done an amazing job preventing scrambling. You can see it all over the tape. They'll string a guy out to the sidelines. And then all their secondary will come up and prevent guys from catching it, working back to the quarterback. I want to avoid those scenarios. I want to get it to the first read when we can, play on time. And if Hurts is going to scramble, run it. Don't try to extend the play forever and then throw it downfield. I just don't think it's effective against the Packers. Maybe you disagree. So I think, especially with Alexander out, they'll be vulnerable, but that's kind of how I've scouted their defense. So what else did you see?
Yeah, so just to put some numbers to what you were saying, they currently run the ninth highest rate of zone coverage. That probably has to do with the fact that Jair Alexander's been out for 10 games this season. They haven't really had a consistent second corner on this team, a consistent second outside corner over the past several years. Keyshawn Nixon has now moved outside. He's been playing pretty well, but I still think they're looking for an upgrade there. And then they also have one of their safeties is their primary slot defender. So I think because of that, they're playing more zone than they typically would. And it's going to be something to watch because Jalen Hurts is significantly better against man coverage than he is against zone coverage. He has a 9.6 yard per attempt average versus man. That's first in the NFL. 7.3 yard per attempt average versus zone. That's 18th in the NFL. The Packers run a slightly above average rate of cover three, and it's primarily spot drop cover three. They have a very athletic back end of their defense, and they like to get vision on the quarterback and then fly to the football and really try and force passes underneath and rally to the football. Their corners are content to give up underneath routes such as curls, comebacks, deep out routes. They just don't want to get beat deep. They do a good job of taking away deep passes. They run the fifth highest rate of cover two and seventh highest rate of cover six. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them try and rotate coverage over top of AJ Brown at points in this game. They do a really good job of disguising and then rotating out of their coverage late, whether they're rotating from single high to two high defenses or rotating from a two high defense to a single high defense. Post snap recognition is going to be very key for Jalen Hurts in this game. They are 14th in rate of 20 plus yard plays allowed, and a large part of those percentage of plays are coming on concepts targeting the middle of the field. So that doesn't really play into what the Eagles do well. They like to target outside, especially when they're trying to go down the field, but the Packers try and sit and stay over top of those routes. Since Jalen Hurts doesn't particularly love throwing over the middle of the field, let's look at some of the ways the Eagles can attack the Packers coverage outside of the numbers. How I would attack the Packers is by isolating their flat defenders. In cover two, or on the backside of cover six, that's most often the outside corner. Smash concepts, where a receiving threat occupies a flat with another receiving threat running a corner route, is a great way to create a vertical stretch on the flat defender. We saw the Eagles use this same principle to beat the Giants late rotation of cover two and last week's game. In cover three, the flat defender varies more often. Sometimes it's a linebacker, a safety, or a nickel corner, but the principle is still similar. Here we see the Eagles send Will Shipley on an orbit motion, faking a bubble screen to get the flat defender to bite up, while at the same time having Devontae Smith fake like he's going to block before running what's essentially a wheel route down the sideline. Again, the flat defender is attacked with a concept designed to make him wrong with either decision he makes. You talked about how they don't blitz a ton. They blitz at a high rate on third and medium or third and long. So that's the times when they do tend to blitz the most. Other than that, it's very below average blitz rates. They do have the fifth highest sim pressure rate, and they have the seventh highest stunt rate. So that's something that the Eagles offensive line and Jalen Hurts will need to be aware of. In terms of their pressure rates, it's just average, 15th according to PFF, 15th according to Pro Football Reference, 20th according to Next Gen Stats, although they're 12th in sack rate. Their run defense, you mentioned it's a good run defense. 3.7 yards per carry on designed runs. That's fourth in the NFL. They have a very stout front line. They have big boys up front. Their edge defenders are all 260 to 270 plus pounds. Their top two interior defensive linemen and run snaps are 315 plus pounds. So it's a big defense on the front, and then extremely athletic linebackers on the back end that fly to the football. They hit ball carries behind the line of scrimmage at the fourth highest rate in the NFL, and the Eagles have the highest yards before contact average in the NFL. So that's going to be a key thing to watch for in this game. Now, they will bump their second level defenders with motion, so you can dictate matchups and coverage using motion, and you can also dictate which defenders are in the run fit as well. And you mentioned they get a ton of turnovers, fourth in total turnovers with 31. That's 17 interceptions, which is third, 14 fumble recoveries, that's third as well. So they get turnovers in a bunch of different ways. And one last thing I will add is that they will match base personnel with base defense. So, like we saw in the Steelers game, the first play of the game, Eagles came out 12 personnel, they went spread, and then they threw it over the top of one of the linebackers. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Eagles go empty in 12 personnel and try and spread the Packers defense out a little bit and try and attack that way. But Eric, do you have anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
Yeah, the one thing I'm very curious to see, we talked about how they play more than their fair share of cover two, and Hertz has not attacked that area that would be vulnerable in cover two. In fact, he threw less than 10% of his passes to the middle, more than 10 yards downfield, which is like the second lowest rate in the NFL to Kyler Murray. And with something we talked about in the offseason, why doesn't Hurts like throwing to the middle? And the funny thing is, 4 of his 5 interceptions on the season were on those throws. So despite throwing there so little, that's where he had the interceptions. So of course, makes sense that he'd associate that with a risky pass. And you see it every week in the NFL. Oh, I throw it a little bit high on a pass over the intermediate middle. Then that cover three safety, boom, picks it up. Kirby Joseph, 9 interceptions. I do think the Eagles will need to attack that at times. And there's safer ways to do it. I think an AJ Brown dig route at 10 to 12 yards can be fairly safe, and you can err on the low side.
Yep, all great points, Eric. And make sure to stay tuned for next episode as we will be previewing the skill position players.